The Sovereign Military Academy of the Teraxian Empire had graduated survival specialists for 347 standard cycles, and in that time, they had perfected the art of breaking cadets down to their base instincts. Phase 7 of their training protocol was delightfully simple in concept and horrifically effective in execution. Take away everything, drop the cadets into a Class 4 death world, and see who remembered that survival was supposed to be difficult, not impossible. Most species, the Academy had discovered, were terrible at this. The Clawthians, with their 6 arms and natural armor plating, typically spent the first day trying to punch trees into submission. The crystalline Zephrites could predict weather patterns with their atmospheric sensors, but tended to shatter when those predictions involved acidic rain they had no shelter from. The Mithari could survive on minimal water for weeks, which was impressive right up until they realized that knowing you will not die of thirst does not solve the problem of actually finding water in the first place. Evolution, it turned out, was a double-edged sword. It gave you advantages, certainly, but it also made you complacent about the things you had never needed to worry about. Commander Vec, a Sauroid, whose scales had dulled to the color of old bronze after decades of watching overconfident cadets fail spectacularly, stood in the observation center reviewing the current cohort. 17 cadets from 12 species, each one absolutely convinced their particular biological quirk would carry them through the trial. He loved this part. The hope was delicious because it made the inevitable collapse so much more entertaining. Standard wages, people, he announced to his fellow instructors, pulling up the holographic roster. I have the vril lasting 4 days maximum. Those mandibles are impressive until he tries to eat something that fights back. Instructor Keller, whose species had evolved without a sense of humor and had never bothered to develop one artificially, tapped her datapad. The Zephrite will beacon out within 18 hours. Possibly sooner, if the atmospheric pressure drops. Optimistic, Vec muttered, scrolling through the files. His eyes, which could track movement across a kilometer with predatory precision, stopped on the last entry. Oh wonderful, we have a human this cycle. The observation center went quiet in the way that rooms do when someone mentions they have found mold growing in the ventilation system. A human. Keller's translator struggled with her tone, settling somewhere between disbelief and the sound a person makes when they realize they have stepped in something unpleasant. The bipedal mammals from that water-covered rock in the outer territories, the very same. Vec pulled up the file. Marcus Chen, age 24, standard cycles. No biological enhancements, no natural armor, no venom sacs, no redundant organs, no atmospheric adaptations. The medical scan was almost boring in its ordinariness. 2 arms, 2 legs, forward-facing eyes, and apparently a glowing recommendation from his basic training instructor, who noted he has an unusual persistence in problem-solving scenarios. How long do we give him? Asked Instructor Thren, a Cartesian whose species had evolved in volcanic environments and who considered anything below 200 degrees to be uncomfortably chilly. Vec considered this. Humans were known throughout the galaxy primarily for 2 things: their baffling decision to season their food with chemical compounds that caused pain, and their tendency to adopt predatory animals as companions, and then express confusion when said animals occasionally remembered they were predators. As a survival specialist species, they ranked somewhere below the Glorbians, who had evolved on a moon with no atmosphere and had to wear pressure suits just to experience weather. 12 hours, Vec decided. I am feeling generous. 20 credits says he activates his beacon before the first night cycle. The betting pool grew quickly. Only Instructor Yora, a quiet Selenite who rarely spoke during these sessions, placed a contrary wager. Full 7 days, she said softly, sliding her credits into the pool. The observation center erupted in laughter that sounded like rocks being ground in a mill. Yora, your optimism is noted and will be mourned along with your credits, Vec said, pulling up the transport schedule. Prepare for drop sequence. Let us see which of our confident cadets remembers that biology is not a substitute for capability. The Verlang jungle was classified as a Class 4 death world, which meant it was actively trying to kill you, but at least had the decency to maintain an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere while doing so. The designation was somewhat misleading because it implied there were only 4 classes of danger, when in reality the classification system stopped at 4 because survey teams rarely survived long enough on anything worse to file proper reports. The jungle canopy rose 300 meters in places, creating a permanent twilight at ground level where bioluminescent fungi provided just enough light to see the thing that was about to eat you. The air was thick enough to chew, saturated with moisture that corroded most metals and encouraged the growth of approximately 6,000 species of plants, 4,000 of which were carnivorous to varying degrees. The local fauna had adapted by developing either exceptional camouflage, paralyzing toxins, or the philosophical outlook that attack was the best defense and also the best offense and really the best approach to all situations. The Academy loved it here. The dropship hovered at 2,000 meters while the cadets were processed through final prep. This involved removing literally everything they had brought, including clothing, tools, communications devices, and in one memorable case 3 cycles ago, a cadet's artificial limb that they had argued was technically part of their body. Commander Vec had ruled that if it could be removed without causing immediate death, it stayed on the ship. Each cadet received exactly 3 items: a subcutaneous emergency beacon that would summon extraction within 30 minutes, a medical monitor that would automatically activate said beacon if vital signs became concerning, and the knowledge that using the beacon meant immediate failure of Phase 7 and likely dismissal from the Academy. Marcus Chen stood in the prep line, looking substantially less concerned than Vec felt he should be. The human was scanning the briefing information on the Verlang environment with the kind of focused attention most species reserved for religious texts or bomb disposal instructions. "Problem, Cadet Chen?" Vec asked, stopping beside him. "No, Commander." The human glanced up. His eyes were brown, which Vec had learned was average for the species, and contained an expression that the translator attempted to render as calm interest. "Just reviewing the indigenous flora. The briefing mentions the Verlang strangler vine has a tensile strength of 400 kilopascals. Is that measurement accurate?" Vec blinked. In 347 cycles, no cadet had ever asked about plant structural integrity during drop prep. "Yes. The vines can support approximately 3 times the weight of an adult sauroid." "Why?" "Just curious, Commander." "Thank you." The human returned to his reading, and Vec felt the distinct sensation that he had missed something important. He dismissed it. Humans were known for asking strange questions, probably something about their primitive evolutionary development. The drop was staggered, each cadet released at 5-kilometer intervals to prevent cooperation and ensure individual assessment. The instructors settled into the observation center with the drone feeds, watching as their carefully selected cadets hit the jungle canopy and immediately began making mistakes. The Clothian tried to establish dominance over his landing zone by roaring at the trees. The trees, being plants, remained unimpressed. A Verlang tree leopard, which was neither a tree nor a leopard, but had the temperament of both if both were having exceptionally bad days, responded to the challenge with interest. Beacon activation in 3, 2. Keller counted down. The Clothian's roar turned into a scream. The beacon signal flared on the tactical display. 18 minutes. Vec noted. New record for fastest failure. Thren, you owe me 10 credits. The Zephyrite managed 4 hours before the atmospheric moisture caused hairline fractures in her crystalline structure. The Mytharian made it until nightfall before realizing that while he did not need much water, he did need some water, and the only water source he had found was inhabited by something with too many teeth. The vril lasted impressively until day 2 before a fungal infection from a minor scratch convinced him that modern medicine was worth more than pride. By the end of the first day, 9 cadets had activated their beacons. By the end of the second day, that number had climbed to 14, and Marcus Chen had vanished. Define vanished, Vec said, staring at the drone feed that showed nothing but jungle where the human should be. He entered the canopy at grid reference 774 and disappeared from visual tracking, the surveillance officer reported. Beacon is still active and showing healthy vitals, but we have no visual confirmation. Find him. 3 drones converged on the beacon signal, high-resolution cameras scanning the jungle floor. They found him 20 minutes later, and Vec had to replay the footage 3 times before he believed what he was seeing. The human was testing vines, not frantically grabbing at them or using them to pull himself through the undergrowth like most cadets did. He was systematically selecting vines of different thicknesses, cutting samples with a piece of sharp stone he appeared to have made, and then attempting to break them by pulling, bending and twisting. The ones that passed his tests were being coiled and set aside. The ones that failed were discarded. "What is he doing?" Keller asked, her confusion evident even through the translator. "I have absolutely no idea," Vec admitted. "But mark this footage. I want to review it later." The human moved with purpose but not panic, working his way through the undergrowth while occasionally stopping to examine plants or pick up rocks. By the time the first night cycle began, he had collected an assortment of materials that looked like refuse to everyone watching. "He is going to die," Thren predicted. "No shelter, no fire, no food preparation. He will last the night if he is lucky, and tomorrow he will beacon out when he realizes primitive behavior is not sufficient." The human spent the first hour of darkness sitting motionless against a tree, apparently listening to the jungle. Then he stood, gathered his collected materials, and moved to a different location entirely. He repeated this process 3 times before settling on a spot where 3 large trees formed a natural triangle. And then he started building. "Oh, now this is just sad," Vec muttered, watching the human weave vines between the trees. "He thinks he can construct shelter from plants. Someone track how long before structural failure." But the shelter did not fail. The human worked through most of the night, his movements careful and methodical. He used the thicker vines as structural supports, lashing them to the trees at specific angles. The thinner vines became a lattice framework. He gathered broad leaves and began layering them in overlapping patterns across the framework, creating what was unmistakably a thatched roof. By dawn, Marcus Chen had a raised platform shelter 3 feet off the ground with a waterproof roof, drainage considerations, and what appeared to be a separate area designated for tool storage. The observation center was silent. "He built a house," Keller said finally. "The human built a house. It is a primitive structure at best," Vec countered, but his voice lacked conviction. "We will see how it holds up to actual environmental stress." Day 3 brought the environmental stress in the form of acidic rain, a regular Verlang occurrence that typically sent cadets scrambling for cave systems or dense canopy cover. The 2 remaining non-human cadets both activated their beacons within an hour of the downpour starting, unwilling to risk chemical burns. Marcus Chen sat in his shelter, which was not only keeping him dry, but apparently comfortable, and worked on making more tools. He had progressed from simple sharp rocks to what could only be described as a comprehensive toolkit. Using techniques that made Vec's head hurt trying to understand, the human had created cutting implements, grinding stones, and something that looked suspiciously like a primitive hammer. He was using these tools to process other materials, creating cordage from plant fibers by twisting them in a method that seemed obvious in retrospect, but that no one in the observation center had ever considered. "Where did he learn this?" Yora asked quietly. "His file makes no mention of primitive survival training," Keller reported, scrolling through Marcus Chen's records. "Standard academy prep, basic wilderness orientation, nothing that would explain this level of capability." Vec enhanced the drone feed, watching as the human used his stone knife to strip bark from a particular species of tree. The bark was then being shredded into fibers and woven into something. "What is he making now?" "It appears to be a container of some kind," the surveillance officer said. "Possibly for water storage based on the weaving pattern." "He is engineering solutions," Yora observed, "not relying on biological advantages or expecting technology to solve problems. He is looking at available resources and asking what they can become." "It is primitive," Vec insisted, but he was watching the feed with growing unease. Day 4 brought new developments. The human had constructed a bow drill fire-starting system and achieved flame after approximately 40 minutes of sustained effort. The instructors watched in fascination as he carefully nurtured the ember into a small fire, feeding it with progressively larger fuel. He then built a fire management system with green wood barriers and a smoke deflection design that kept the fire concealed from aerial view while venting smoke through the canopy. "He is hiding from our drones," Thren realized. "He knows we are watching and does not want to give away his position unnecessarily." "Tactical thinking," Yora said approvingly. The human used his fire to harden wooden points, creating primitive spears. He constructed fish traps from woven vines and placed them in the nearby stream that all the other cadets had avoided because of the aggressive aquatic life. His traps worked on a principle that was simultaneously elegant and obvious: let the fish swim in easily, but make it difficult for them to find the exit. By evening, he was smoking fish over his fire for preservation. "How does he know to do that?" Vec demanded. "Food preservation requires understanding of bacterial growth, moisture content, temperature control. Those are advanced concepts." Yora suggested. "They are ancient concepts that his species never forgot because they did not evolve biological alternatives." Day 5 began with a meteorological alert. A major storm system was approaching, the kind that produced lightning strikes capable of flash-boiling small lakes and winds that could strip bark from trees. Academy protocol dictated immediate extraction of all cadets during such events because even the emergency beacons could fail in severe weather. "Pull him out," Keller said immediately. "Wait." Vec studied the drone feed. The human had noticed the changing atmospheric pressure, evidenced by his sudden increase in activity. He was reinforcing his shelter, digging drainage trenches around the perimeter, and moving his fire to a protected area under an overhang. "Let us see what he does." Commander Protocol specifically states that I am aware of what Protocol states, Instructor Keller. I am also aware that we have a cadet who has survived 4 days using nothing but rocks and plants. I want to see how he handles this. The storm hit like a physical force, turning the jungle into a chaos of wind and water. Lightning struck with enough frequency to turn night into strobing day. The rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to less than 10 meters. The drone feeds showed trees bending nearly horizontal, smaller plants being ripped from the ground, and water levels rising rapidly. And in the middle of it, Marcus Chen sat in his elevated shelter, completely dry, maintaining a small fire with carefully stored tinder and a bark shield design that protected the flame from wind and rain. He had even constructed a small roof extension that was catching rainwater and funneling it into his woven containers. "He is using the storm as a resource," Yura said softly. "Not fighting it, not hiding from it, working with it." The storm lasted 6 hours. When it passed, the jungle was transformed. Flooding had created temporary rivers, debris was scattered everywhere, and approximately 30% of the standing vegetation had been damaged or destroyed. It would have been a disaster for any surviving cadet. Marcus Chen emerged from his shelter, surveyed the changes to his environment, and immediately began adapting his systems to the new reality. The flooding had exposed new clay deposits. He collected samples. Fallen trees provided access to previously unreachable areas. He explored them. The storm had even delivered a deceased Verlang tree leopard, killed by a lightning strike, which the human approached with appropriate caution before determining it was safe and beginning to process the carcass for usable materials. "He is treating this as an opportunity," Vex said, more to himself than anyone else. "The storm that should have ended him is being converted into advantages." Day 6 and 7 became a showcase in human persistence. The cadet expanded his camp, creating multiple shelters for different purposes. He constructed a smoking rack for meat preservation that would have impressed a food science engineer. His tool collection grew to include specialized implements for specific tasks. He wove a basket using a technique so complex that Keller had to run it through the Academy's database to identify the pattern, discovering it was a traditional design from Earth that dated back thousands of cycles. The human was not just surviving, he was thriving. When the extraction team arrived on Day 7, the official end of Phase 7 trials, they found Marcus Chen casually weaving another basket while fish smoked on his rack and water purified through his sand and charcoal filtration system. His camp had become a small wilderness homestead, complete with multiple fire areas, organized tool storage, a latrine system dug at an appropriate distance from his water source, and what appeared to be the beginning of a root cellar for food storage. "Good morning," he said cheerfully when the extraction team materialized in his camp. "I was starting to think you might have forgotten about me." The team leader, a veteran Sauroid named Kelth, who had conducted hundreds of extractions, stared at the camp in open confusion. "Cadet Chen, did you construct all of this?" "Yes, sir." "Is there a problem?" "I know. No problem. Please gather your—" Kelth trailed off, realizing the absurdity of asking the human to gather belongings he had not brought. "Please prepare for extraction." "Of course, sir." "Should I dismantle the camp, or will it be left for analysis?" "Left for analysis," Kelth said weakly. Marcus Chen stood, brushed dirt from his hands with the casual air of someone who had just completed a mildly interesting project, and joined the extraction team. As they lifted off, the drone feeds captured one final image of his camp, a testament to human stubbornness rendered in vine stone and the philosophical refusal to accept that a problem might not have a solution. Commander Vex sat in his office 3 days later, reviewing the after-action report with the kind of resignation usually reserved for people who have just discovered that everything they thought they knew was slightly incorrect. Marcus Chen had received the highest survival rating in Academy history. His performance had been analyzed by 12 different departments, each trying to explain how a species with no significant biological advantages had outperformed cadets who could see in the dark, breathe underwater, or regenerate lost limbs. The conclusion was simultaneously simple and deeply uncomfortable. Humans had evolved without specialization, which meant they had been forced to develop something more dangerous than biological advantages. They had developed the cognitive flexibility to look at any situation and ask not what they were evolved to do, but what they could figure out how to do. Where other species saw a vine and thought transportation or obstacle, humans saw rope, structure, container, and weapon. Where other species saw a rock and thought geology, humans saw hammer, knife, anchor, and fire starter. The entire species appeared to operate on the assumption that if a problem existed, a solution could be engineered from available materials and sufficient stubbornness. It was, Vec reflected, an absolutely terrifying approach to survival, because it meant humans did not need to be stronger, faster, or more resilient than threats. They just needed to be more creative, and creativity was not something you could defend against with teeth or claws. The betting pool had paid out to Yora, who accepted her winnings with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen something others had missed. The Academy quietly began revising their Phase 7 curriculum to include primitive technical skills, because apparently those were still relevant in an age of faster-than-light travel and energy weapons. And in a decision that was never officially recorded, but was understood by everyone involved, the Sovereign Military Academy of the Teraxian Empire stopped accepting human applicants to their survival programs. Not because humans could not survive, but because they survived too well and were absolutely ruining the statistical models that 347 cycles of data had been built upon. After all, when your survival trial is designed to strip cadets down to their base capabilities, it becomes problematic when one species' base capability is apparently the pathological refusal to acknowledge that giving up is an option. Vec filed his report, collected his things, and paused at the door of his office to look back at the drone footage still playing on his display. Marcus Chen, covered in mud and smiling despite having every reason not to, weaving another basket, because he had noticed his first one had a structural flaw he wanted to correct. Humans, Vec decided, were going to be a problem for the entire galaxy. Not because they were aggressive or expansionist or possessed superior technology, but because they looked at the universe and genuinely believed that everything in it could be converted into tools if you just thought about it hard enough and were willing to put in the work. The commander of the most prestigious survival academy in known space turned off the lights and left, wondering if perhaps it was time to consider retirement before humans decided to revolutionize any more of his carefully structured programs. Behind him, the footage looped again, showing a single human turning a death world into a home with nothing but vines, determination, and the evolutionary inheritance of a species that had never learned the word impossible because they had been too busy figuring out how to make fire.